Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Fawz Al-Ghazali from Trends Research and Advisory, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Dr. Muhammad Ali, the Director General of Trends Research and Advisory. We are conducting this lecture in parallel with the virtual book fair organized by Trends Research and Advisory from January 24th to February 7th. And we are running this e-lecture on the future of books in the digital age. It's notable nowadays that this digital age has transformed the medium of disseminating knowledge from traditional hardcover and printed books to more accessible resources. For example, we can find today that Amazon, which is the most common book-selling platform worldwide, revealed that ebooks and Kindle sales are high on the rise due to their affordability, availability, and transformability to different electronic devices. Another fact is that books are surprisingly no longer the principal cultural medium. This is possibly because they are increasingly becoming relegated to a lower edge by the flashing screens like iPads, ebooks, Kindles, tablets, and other related electronic media. However, we can find that today there is too much debate has been running about the advantages of printed books over digital books and vice versa. Some people, unfortunately, feel passionate to keep copies of printed books to have a record of what they have already read. They also believe that printed books are designed for focus and they have the minimal distractors, and readers do not have to worry about internet connection or missing power supply. Others find, on the other hand, others find that digital books allow for allow for the ease of reading and access to thousands of books. Besides, they are cost effective and allow for access to inbuilt dictionaries. Hence, the debate is mostly endless. And our lecture of today aims at shedding more light on the future of digital books within this artificial intelligence age. In agreement with these changes, Trends Research and Advisory organizes this e-lecture on the future of ebooks in the digital age. I would like to welcome all the audience who are following us on social media platforms and on YouTube channels broadcast with simultaneous Arabic translation. Our speaker for today is Mr. Porter Anderson. He has been named International Trade Press Journalist of the Year in London Book Fair's 2019 International Excellence Awards. He is the editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, and he is the co-founded The Hot Sheet, a newsletter from trade and indie authors, which now is owned and operated by Jane Friedman. He formerly was associate editor for the Future Book at London's The Bookseller. Anderson has worked as a senior producer, editor, and anchor with CNN.com, CNN International, and CNN USA, and as an arts critic with the Village Voice and Dallas Times Herald. Mr. Anderson, welcome to Trends Research and Advisory, and it's our pleasure to have you with us today.
Fauzi, many thanks. A lovely introduction. I appreciate it very much, and I've been enjoying learning more about what Trends is doing. It's such an amazing program with great breadth and depth, and I admire and appreciate what you're doing. I congratulate you. Such good work. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to thank...
Walaikum assalam. Thank you very, very much.
I
just would like to remind you, Mr. Anderson, that as a normal procedure for today, your lecture is supposed to take between 30 to 35 minutes. Okay. And this will be followed by an open discussion through some questions that have been posted to us by our followers on the social media applications, and also by many people who are interested to know more and more about the future of ebooks in this digital life, and about also the future of print books, whether this will be some sort of archaic records which will no longer be used by people worldwide, or there are also some availability for printed books, in even if we have some more advancement in the technology and digital life. I also would like to invite our followers to post in other questions on our social media platforms if they are interested. So, Mr. Anderson, you can start from now, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fauzi. This is nice of you, and I'm very glad to hear such good questions coming in. We will want to touch on all of those. The biggest answer I can give you is that nothing is going away. We are adding more thanks to our technologies. And so those who are very fond of print, don't worry. It will not go away. We can promise you that. I'd like to thank our host again for having me. It's been great to be in touch previous to our conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to our interchange today. I've had the honor many times to travel into the United Arab Emirates, and I come to you today, of course, from the United States, which is undergoing profound and rapid and very important transformations. Our new president, Joe Biden, and his highly accomplished vice president, Kamala Harris, have selected an outstanding group of deeply experienced and insightful cabinet members. And we hope that you will find us soon to be a restabilized America, regrounded in the critical values that are shared by both of our countries. It makes it extra special to be able to talk to you today. As you may know, as editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, I am engaged by Frankfurt Book Fair, Frankfurter Buchmesse, which is the largest of the world's trade shows in the book industry, and created this news medium about 10 years ago to serve the international publishing industry. We are the media partner of the International Publishers Association, and we're very pleased to see the Sheikha Badur Al-Qasimi of Sharjah take up her post this month as president of the association, the first in more than 50 years, the first woman to hold this post, a very proud moment. We look forward to her leadership. And we also, of course, are very grateful to the work of the Sheikh Sultan bin Mohammed Al-Qasimi in Sharjah, an author himself. I always like to remind people, a very fine and accomplished historical author who knows the value of reading. We are also the media partner, I might mention to you, of the Sheikh Zayed Book Award. And we are so proud of the work that Dr. Ali bin Tamim is doing there as Secretary General. For 15 years now, they have been growing and growing in submissions and the quality of what's coming in order to move more of the Arabic culture and its best works into the rest of the world. We can do no better than sharing our literature. That is what brings us together the most. And I have a personal hope that perhaps it will be possible to see an Abu Dhabi book fair this year. We know that the pandemic is giving us all terrible times with our book fairs and our events, but it would be wonderful to be back and to see that beautiful fair happening again. I will knock on wood, as we say. Now, in my comments this evening, I will do two things. First, I am going to walk us through 3 evolutionary inflection points of book publishing's development under the influence of the world's digital transformation. This then will prepare us for the second and most important effort we have yet to go through, the chance to consider together what we may actually mean one day when we say book. I'll be quite selective here because I know that many of our audience are already familiar with some of the factors that I'm going to highlight. I will simply add them into the publishing experience, and then I'll review them only by way of helping to indicate that the real work still lies before us, and there is a steep challenge coming. We must begin to think of something far beyond the digitization of the book, more than the ebook, not less. Certainly more than the print book, but not less. As Fauzi was reminding us, the print book gives us the chance to focus in a way that our technological devices just don't do. And so its value is permanent. And yet we are moving towards something, thanks to technology, that we must take advantage of in the literary world to capitalize on the promise of what's there. As you may know, during the darkest lockdown stages of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, in many of our world book markets, we have seen books and reading reassert themselves and their popularity, often bringing comfort and escape and solid information to populations confined to their homes. This has been very exciting to see, and it has meant that of all things, the book industry has done quite well in many of our markets during the pandemic. The response has been so strong that 2020 is seen in some places now as a banner year. Here in the United States, our print book sales outpaced the previous 10 years' performance, as revealed by the NPD Group, one of our strongest research organizations here in our country. In 2020, we saw print books surpass 2019 sales by 8.2%. That means 751 million copies were sold. It's enormous. And we had thought as the pandemic came in, oh, this is terrible. What will we do? We won't be able to sell. Our bookstores are closing. On the other hand, because digital e-commerce was so ready for this, we were able, with the help of Amazon, which you mentioned, Fauzi, to reach our consumers right through the pandemic and to grow the market rather than see it shrink. But the danger here is that in all of our nations, where we've seen this happy upturn in reading, we might become complacent. It would be wrong to think, for example, that the increased use of digital formats, such as ebooks and audiobooks, would have surged forward as it did without the propulsion of the pandemic. We call this our digital acceleration in the publishing industry, and it has been triggered by the virus. Now, let me see. I'm going to try to bring in our slides now so that you can see what we have. There we go. Fauzi, are you seeing?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Very good. Thank you very much. Great. I'm going to move one of my assets here. There we go. What we need to look ahead about is a more realistic future to find out and understand what books must be as we go forward. We will see that the three interlocking concepts coming into play involve distribution, integrity, and something I'm going to call the story core, as in the core of the earth, the center, the hub. So let us look at our three inflection points from the recent past. The first inflection point I'm going to mention to you arrived on the 19th of November, 2007. That's the date on which Amazon's Kindle ebook reading device was released. It was hardly the first e-reading device. It had been preceded, for example, by a very large and heavy unit called the Franklin Reader, and by a much smaller device that I quite liked called a Sony Reader. But the Kindle, referred to when it was launched as the iPod of reading, right? It sold out within hours, and it has continued to dominate the field in almost all markets for 13 years. What we want to notice at this inflection point is why that has happened, why the Kindle has been such a hit. The real genius of the Kindle is not the reader that you're looking at right now, or even the modern editions, but the ecosystem Amazon built behind it. The walled garden, as you might have heard it called, is encouraging consumers over and over daily by the hour to buy their ebooks again from Amazon. And of course, the popularity of the Kindle system at its inception and now has to do with the ease and the speed with which a new purchase or a sample is downloaded and read on any device. This brings us to another important element of our subject that we need to understand very clearly. When we say the digital transformation in terms of book publishing, what we're really talking about is not devices and not even the content. We are talking about distribution. The digital dynamic, not only in books, but also in spoken word audio, in film, television, music, video games, even in the Zoom session through which we're sharing our time right now, is about distribution. While most consumers and many publishing professionals in 2007 were focused on the e-reading device at the time the Kindle was introduced, Amazon understood very well itself as a channel. It knew that the Kindle was a way to reach its consumers and to make sales. At the same time, it could draw data from those consumers, learning more about them, knowing who they were, knowing where they were, and providing more enticing sales for them to come to next. The second inflection point is less a point than a kind of ramble, if you will, of 7 to 10 years, a period after the Kindle's introduction in which we were exploring initiatives called enhanced ebooks, sometimes augmented reality. A few exercises even involved virtual reality. Even the Kindle team, as a matter of fact, got in on this, producing a series of heavily marketed ebooks with what's called Kindle in Motion technology. It places an image, if you'd like, that moves on the page of an ebook as a chapter opening illustration, for example. What you see here is a couple of pages from an interactive edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It was created as an app in London by a company called Inkle Studios, and it was published by the UK's publishing house Profile Books. It was designed by Dave Morris, who is in fact a very literary game designer. Starts to make sense, right? And his experiment here was to create this telling of the modern Prometheus, as Shelley subtitled her book, as a work the reader directed. You could move passages of text around. You could choose for Victor Frankenstein what he would do next. The work was really quite beautiful in its artistry and its ability to capture the great ethical dilemmas that Shelley wrote into her masterpiece, but it did not sell. For the most part, these attempts to bring bits of video or audio or interactive content into ebooks have not been successful. They've been very expensive to produce, and in some instances of augmented reality, which has played a role in children's books, parents have found that a child might enjoy looking at the dinosaur picture on a page, for example, watch the dinosaur move and speak, but then children, as they will do, get tired of their new device and they move on to something else. And so even in children's books, these effects within e-reading have not been very happily received. What we want to learn from this inflection is something about the desire of the consumer, of the reader, to have some sense that the integrity of a book has been respected. Even when you bring the best intentions of a project of this kind, as Dave Morris did with the Frankenstein piece, you are imposing another entertainment onto the experience of reading a book. And we've learned that you may not find a market of any size for it. People who come to books are there to read. This is good news, but we had to learn it. And enhancements from other media formats seem to be interruptions to the reading experience, however beautifully rendered and creatively intended they are. This can be confusing because the same consumer who rejects the interactive edition of Frankenstein will happily listen to an audiobook edition of the book, or see a film interpretation, or watch a television series based on Frankenstein. But it turns out that when a consumer comes to the book itself, ebook or print, she or he wants to read the book. That's an important lesson for all of us. And finally, that's what brings us to our third inflection point before we move into the age that's coming. The rebirth of audiobooks. All of us, I'm sure, here are much too young to remember this, but we discovered audiobooks first as consumers in the form of cassette tapes. Do you remember the cassette tapes? It was the best medium we had at the time. The time was 1964. Philips in the Netherlands introduced them, calling on the brand Norelco. And it would soon be called the compact cassette. By the mid-70s, the cassette had come to dominate the market, pushing aside 8-track cartridges. The next thing that overtook the cassette, however, was, whoops, sorry, I've gone too far for you. Hang on, there we go. The next thing that actually overtook those cassettes was the CD, the compact disc. The medium began to enter many marketplaces in the mid-'80s and really made itself known most prominently by 1991. And only 7 years later, in 1998, audiobooks would be reborn. A company called Audible.com established a website at which a consumer could buy an audiobook and simply download it to a device from which it could be played. Today, then, we know the audiobook to be a kind of once and future medium. Didn't make it as cassettes, didn't make it as CDs, but now audiobooks are in the major English language markets and in the Scandinavian markets particularly, the fastest growing sales sector in the publishing portfolio. And that growth lies in that downloadable format. That's digital audio at work. Between 2014 and 2018, in fact, the Audio Publishers Association saw digital audiobooks advance from 69.1% of the format sales to 91.4%. In other words, downloadable digital audio has won completely. There is a caveat here, though. Although we get excited in the publishing industry about the success of audiobooks, and we have seen years of double-digit growth in audiobooks' biggest market, the United States, and in several other of the major markets, the latest figures from the Association of American Publishers StatShot reports tell us that in any given month, audiobooks account for only between about 6 to 8% of American book publishing. So the sector is not huge. It's just growing fast. And what we do see then in this third inflection point, the audiobooks coming in as digital content, is distribution. Once more, we're back to the fact that the success lies in digital distribution's capability, streaming, and downloads that have made the audiobook medium viable for our customers, many of whom are now intensely loyal to reading a book by listening to it. What we've seen then in this quick look back at the digital transformation in publishing so far is that in experimentation and audiobooks, two major themes have emerged. Digital means distribution, and a major part of what makes books and reading valuable to consumers is the book's integrity, rather than a creation of a more hybrid development such as an ebook with video or audio embedded in it. In looking at the past years of digital transformation, the clues to what the future of books will be are found in those two factors, distribution and integrity. And I propose that the biggest challenge for publishers, authors, agents, editors, even our loyal readers, is going to be that digital's inevitable patterns of distribution will challenge books and reading's integrity. And a new opportunity has just arrived to study what this may mean in a company that operates in the publishing space, in reading and writing, and in the future of both. Just last week, it was announced, and we had the pleasure of covering this at Publishing Perspectives, that the Canadian company called Wattpad, I hope you're familiar with it, is being very happily acquired by the South Korean internet company called Naver. It looks like the word never, but it's an A, Naver. Many publishing professionals have considered Wattpad a kind of amateur hub of social reading for young adults, not worth their attention. That turns out to have been short-sighted, particularly when we found out that Wattpad's price is $600 million US. It is huge. In its 14 years, Wattpad has been developed by its co-founders, Alan Lau and Ivan Yuan, as a platform on which writers create serial stories, followed by huge crowds of their peers, numbering in the millions. These authors have included Margaret Atwood of The Handmaid's Tale fame. Today, Wattpad is based in Toronto, is followed in most markets of the world by a monthly crowd of 90 million users. They spend, you're ready for a very big number, they spend 23 billion minutes a month on the platform. Some 5 million of them are the writers. The rest are readers. The content is available in more than 50 languages. Top markets include the United States, Indonesia, the Philippines, Brazil, Mexico, India, the United Kingdom, and Turkey. Around 80% of Wattpad's audience is in Generation Z, between 13 and 24 years old. Exactly the young readers we would like to capture, you know. Precisely the age group, too, that publishers find hard to reach at times, especially as they reach young adulthood. They get busy, we start losing them from the world of reading. Over its decade and a half of development, Wattpad has become a kind of literary agency for many of its writers, getting their books published by the world's biggest publishers. The first was Simon & Schuster, to pick up an entire series of books that came from the Wattpad platform. Wattpad Studios has developed what's called first look deals with production companies and film television studios around the world, meaning that these studios can look at a book first and say, I would like to produce this or not. They get the first option. The Wattpad Books program is actually now publishing its own books. The platform has become a publishing house itself. Hardcover and paperback, not just ebooks and audiobooks. What this new merger with the Korean company, Naver, will do, however, is connect Wattpad's 90 million users with Naver's 72 million users. They are going over 160 million users together by combining. And the real draw of what Naver has in place is called Webtoon. That is a platform for digital comics. It operates much as Wattpad does. Because comics are often followed mostly by male readers, one great benefit to Wattpad is going to be that as the two companies merge, their audiences will discover each other's content. And this could be helpful because Wattpad's readers are 80% female. Webtoon's readers are approximately the same on the male side. They expect the cross-pollination of these readers to swell their audiences on both platforms. Very clever technique. But beyond that, the reason that we're looking at this merger, as CEO Alan Lau put it to me in an interview last week, is that he is able with Naver to add comics and animation to his mix of content formats at Wattpad. He said, just imagine one intellectual property, a story on our platform. There are so many ways we can capture the value of that intellectual property, not just in text anymore, but also in the form of print books, in the form of movies, in the form of comics, in the form of television shows. You name it, we can cover it, and it's going to be a whole lot more. And this is where the future of books is headed. In the digital future, imagine the book as something we might call a story core, that phrase I gave you earlier. And it is exactly what Alan Lau just referred to as the intellectual property, the story that one of the writers there has created. By that, I mean that we're talking about that core intellectual property, and it exists maybe as a book. There will always be print, as we're saying, for those who want them, not least thanks to print on demand. But it can also exist as audio, film, television, video games, comics, animation, even as nothing but social media threads and music. The reason this much flexibility is going to be required of publishers and authors goes back to the key factors we've identified: distribution and integrity. There are times that they're ironically competing elements. Digital distribution has done something never seen before. It has placed books side by side with sister entertainment media on digital devices immediately available to consumers. It has not been long that people could actually be reading a book and go, I think I'll stop and watch this film right on the same device they have in their hand. The reason for this is that the reason a reader these days may not finish reading a book, might not even get through a page, is because he or she is reading on a smartphone. And there, our consumer is continually being sent to film and television, video, other enticements, along with email, social media, texts. There is so much coming in on these wonderful little magical devices. Books have to learn somehow to hold their ground while living side by side with other seductive digital media in the way that print books have never had to do. To do this, they will need to establish their own integrity, much like excellent film and television production has done in recent years. We are in something of a golden age of production, which is wonderful to see. Positioned as a story core, what we used to call books can be prepared for this multi-layered market of the future by being developed for every consumer and designed for every immediate availability. What will this require? Well, as Wattpad is demonstrating, and as some publishers are already doing, partnerships are the key. Whether through the financial mergers that we're seeing with Korea and with Canada, or through simply formalized cooperative agreements, a publisher, and by extension an author, is going to need to have a strong working relationship with film and television production companies and studios, with musical artists and agencies, with video production and gaming vendors, with comics and graphics, as we've seen, for graphic novel artists, and for audiobooks, producers and distributors, and more. We will see a new example of this when the new Denis Villeneuve production of Frank Herbert's 1965 Dune is released in October. It's a well-known intellectual property, a well-known story core, if you will, which has had additional ancillary books created by Herbert's own son, Brian, over the years, as well as multiple cinematic and television efforts, some of them challenged at points by audiences for their integrity, the authenticity of the story core, It has become quite a debate as to which is the best interpretation of Dune, who handles Frank Herbert the best. This is a wonderful thing when you see literary work become the coin of the realm, if you will, in terms of discussions of this kind. The consumer who encounters a new story core is going to need to be offered as many ways in, as many entrances to the content as possible. And this might mean regular books, but in immediately available translation, as when Barack Obama's A Promised Land was released in November by Penguin Random House on a single day in 25 international languages and countries and territories. It may be film and serial television productions, but shows also produced in multiple languages, as Netflix has become very good at doing. The CEO of HarperCollins India, Ananth Padmanabhan, told me earlier this month that Netflix released 70 productions in a single month recently in India during pandemic lockdowns. That is how agile that enormous company is at being able to produce and then channel translated content directly into a single market, taking advantage of a moment when people, of course, needed to see as much content as they could. They were confined to their homes. A publisher needs to be the owner of this story core from which every one of these productions was derived, and be actively developing that core in every mode and format available. And if the demands of this distribution channel are obvious, the demands for integrity may be more subtle. Integrity will come to become a gauge of just how true a publisher and its partners can be to that author's core of a story. As you can tell, this future is not so far away. Even now, Amazon Prime customers can watch a television series, a treatment of a book, which might have been created by Amazon Studios. And then they can buy that book at Amazon and have it on their favorite device to read in a Kindle edition within seconds. The audiobook is available from audible.com, which Amazon now owns, and Amazon Publishing has created a new imprint called Topple Books, which is designed to generate books that can be produced in association with streaming television productions. In other words, Amazon Studios is now working hand in hand with the publishing house to create its new story cores and build them out into various formats. The question for success for publishers in this future of story cores actually may be primarily emotional. For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, the book business has been quite protective of its storytelling imprimatur. It saw its business as choosing what books would be published because publishers believed that they knew best how to set the agenda, as we say, for the reading public. They knew what you needed to read. All that has been changed in the digital dynamic. Now the customer is king and queen, and publishers are learning to use their data to develop better understandings of what those customers want. The publishing industry knows that it must react quickly and begin to think of altering what it sells, learning to think of the product as the story core, not something always made of paper and ink or even of pixels on a screen. It has to learn to understand what its customers are asking for and how to produce that in partnership with experts in those nearby entertainment media. And this is harder than it sounds. With shared creative development comes a loosening of control. Publishers and authors and their partners will learn that what they need to be jealous of is the integrity of that story core, not just for purposes of copyright, although that is all important, but also in terms of branding. The Dr. Seuss estate has been especially canny in its licensing, in this case to Skechers for a line of sneakers, to produce merchandise from Theodore Geisel's books that faithfully capture the spirit of the original writings. This is well-protected story core material at work, being licensed out in a very canny way. Publishers may find that in an era of story core development, they need to do more to brand themselves in the minds of consumers. A Penguin Random House story core may bear distinctive elements that a HarperCollins story core or a Macmillan story core won't have. In the past, publishers have remained in the background. You rarely knew their names. Now they are coming forward because they're realizing they can create a following through digital means for their branding. And it must be more or less important that it means introducing customers to publishers so these users will know how to come back to the right publishers who offer them what they want and what they like. If this sounds like a reach, consider how hard Amazon Studios, Hulu, Netflix, and the other streaming services work to distinguish themselves in the viewers' minds. Come back to Netflix, come back to Amazon Studios, come back to Prime, right? This is how these big companies are learning. We must be the name, we must be the branding, because our story cores must be the ones they want. There is a lot to learn, of course, going forward into a future of development for digital distribution across platforms, formats, and media. Probably most concerning will be the integrity question. How much license is allowed to artists and technicians working on each evocation of a story core? The real challenge may be for industry professionals in many media to learn to trust each other, to stay out of each other's way, to allow format content development to happen without too many controls, but without a story core being stretched beyond recognition by the artists of a new alliance or partnership somewhere on the other side of the industry from book publishing. Can that museum exhibition live up to the author's vision? Can both a single film treatment and a 13-part television series be made from the same story core, but by different creative artists and casts? What if two books are written from a single story core, but by two different authors and in two different genres? Maybe a thriller, maybe a romance. Do we know how to market such a thing? And are publishers ready to own, produce, and market story cores that start not with authors, but with other practitioners? What does a publisher's contract with a gaming entrepreneur look like? Where is the literary agent who shepherds a visual artist's story core over to Faber and Faber in London, right? The sociological reality is that all of this developmental range and grace will likely be easier for the consumer to accept and enjoy than our publishers. They have learned that the value of digitally gathered data, of direct consumer interaction, of the rising importance of e-commerce, even in a pandemic year, and the excellence with which many production houses are operating today to produce storytelling on screen so good that it does not leave you feeling that you have to go read the book. All of this means letting go of the book as the primary medium. And that's a tough ask. Understanding what once was the book is now a story core. This is going to be essential, but it's a bump. I believe that this vision of what's ahead is hopeful, although the adjustments that it causes will be for some publishing professionals quite difficult. But as you turn to see, as we turn to see if you have questions and comments on what you're hearing right now, along with the ones that you've already submitted to us, I'd like to leave you with a curious and yet unsurprising point about the amazing prescience of the digital age philosopher Marshall Mcluhan, who lived and died a few years before the compact disc had even become prominent in audiobooks. What Marshall Mcluhan said will echo what writers hear in this future story cores. Authorship, Mcluhan wrote, in the sense that we know it today of individual intellectual effort related to the book as an economic commodity, was practically unknown before the advent of print technology. Medieval scholars were indifferent to the precise identity of the books they studied. In turn, they rarely signed even what was clearly their own. They were a humble service organization. Procuring texts was often a very tedious and time-consuming task. Many small texts were transmitted into volumes of miscellaneous content, very much like jottings in a scrapbook. And in this transmission, authorship was lost. This is a great warning to us, in Mcluhan's words. The authors of our best story cores in the future will be as valuable as our most powerful writers are today, but they may not arrive as authors. They might be photographers, videographers, film editors, composers, choreographers, sculptors, and more. We must learn to watch for them, recognize them, and be ready, very ready, to see that their story cores are being produced in every conceivable medium we have at our disposal to reach the consumer base with their best messages. Ours is a brand new world, Mcluhan said, of all at onceness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, for this fascinating presentation about the future of books in the digital age.
Thank you,
And
Faisal.
I am personally very impressed about this historical development of what you have already said, starting from the old and traditional or conventional printed books to the cassettes and how they are developed to the digital audiobooks nowadays. And also reflections on the different devices, electronic devices developed by like Amazon Kindle device, like the Wattpad, like the Neva, and the different devices that have been introduced in the market nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah, in order to encourage people for reading. But how can, from your point of view, why do you think this very fast development in the field of ebooks right now is happening, particularly these days? Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic, which has drastically affected all aspects of life,
Mm.
and also you can find that many universities and the colleges nowadays have been heading up towards virtual education and virtual and distance learning. Do you think that it's only the pandemic that accelerated the popularity of ebooks nowadays and digital learning resources, or in other reasons?
We think it's a natural evolution. We think that this was actually underway already because we were seeing every year a bit of increase in terms of digital adoption. The CEO of Kobo, which you may know, it's like Amazon. It is another very large distributor of ebooks. Michael Tamblyn told me that he may have seen in 1 year as much as 10 years of growth in terms of their uptake in digital reading. And that's because of the pandemic. That much is directly responsible for that. The question we're watching right now, though, is how permanent is this? As bookstores open again, as people are able to move about in our vaccinated future, let's hope it's soon, are they going to go back to print because they loved it more? Or will they have discovered digital for the first time and said, I like this? Personally, I read a great deal of e-material. I love reading books that glow in the dark, I say. I'm very fond of that device. And I, therefore, am perfectly happy with it, while others are only now starting to approach it. Even audiobooks saw quite a bump. Once they got over one problem at the very beginning of the pandemic's inception, we saw audiobooks go way down, and our publishers were very concerned until we realized it's because people were no longer in their cars driving to work or no longer on the subway listening to their audiobooks. Once they had learned at home and working from home what time of day they could listen to audiobooks, it went right back up. And so they did not give up their format, their favorite format of audio. This is a good sign. We think it means that people who have discovered e-reading now through the digital acceleration of the pandemic will stick with it. We hope so, because it gives us so many more ways to offer them good content and good material.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, you can find that here nowadays the publishing houses and the relationship between them, and also the technology. Yes, it is no longer a choice for publishing houses to make some more connection with technology and to transform most of their publications into ebooks. It's not only ebooks but also audiobooks. And you
Yes.
can find that ebooks is just, we can see that it maybe after a few years it will be something from history, because audiobooks right now is taking more popularity. And you mentioned the book of Barack Obama, A Promised Land, and
Yeah.
that and how millions of copies of this book have been sold due to the availability of also the audio version from the book. Do you think that it's no longer a choice for publishing houses to use technology in order to increase their selling rates?
Yes, you're seeing this very clearly, Fauzi. You're absolutely right. As I call it, it is no longer an option, it is an imperative. The digital
Yeah.
imperative now for publishers is you must be out in electronic formats. And one of the things we learned, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, was that publishers must produce all the formats at once. Originally, you might remember this, I do, a hard copy of a hardcover copy of a book would come out by itself. You wouldn't even be able to get a paperback, maybe for a year. And on a big book like Barack Obama's, maybe for 2 years before they would release a cheaper paperback format. Now It comes out in all formats at once. You can get hardcover, you can get paperback, you can get audio, you can get ebook. This is very important because the publishers have realized, as you're saying, you're right on top of this, it is absolutely an imperative. They must be in the electronic marketplace.
Yes, you can find that, Mr. Anderson, that some developed countries are enjoying the technology and it's very available, and also the facilities which are necessary for order to access electronic books. But you can find at the time we can see the digitalization of books and the learning resources advancing rapidly, and it has become a feature in most developed countries. How do you see people in poor countries who are deprived from technology and they couldn't access the ebooks? How to overcome this issue, and how, if the future will be for the ebooks and for the audiobooks, how can we see the chances for people in poor and we can see that developing cities, developing countries who are not really provided with this facility will be deprived from this advantage?
It's a difficult question. In some cases, yes, there is deprivation. Hugo Setzer is a publisher who's based in Mexico City, and he was president of the International Publishers Association just before Badur Al-Qasimi of Sharjah took up the post. And one of the things that Hugo told me about Mexico, which I had not realized because I haven't been able to visit but a couple of times, is that so much of its population is in very small villages around the country, a bit isolated, and they don't have digital connection. Many of them are not served by any internet capacity. This is not good. If they're not wired, if they're not on the grid, they're in terrible trouble because the rest of the world is moving into an era they're not. One of the interesting things that looks like a counter to this is that in many African countries, where you would think there was very little digital connection, there usually is cell phone connection. And they have, in a sense, skipped over several steps of digital development right to ebooks because they can receive them on their phones and use them. And in many cases, the humanitarian effort now is to get a nice small device, some form of e-reader, to the students, because if it can tie into the phone lines, they can get what they need to read for their classes. But it's been interesting, particularly in digital education during the pandemic year, where there was a good connection, a population might be able to do a certain amount of studying at home. Students were maybe not getting the best experience of being in the classroom, but they could keep up with some lessons with their teacher on a computer, right? Where there wasn't that connection, these students have been terribly deprived. The United Nations, our friends, are working very hard on this problem, a very specialized unit to do what do we do where we don't have a digital connection for everyone. So you've put your finger on it. There's a real question of leaving populations behind if we're not careful in the digital age, and not just in books and reading, but in everything. We must bring the world forward together.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Also, can see from my point of view that I can see that change is mostly, we can say, do you think it's superficially changed in the term of how the material or the content is presented, whether it's from paper based or into electronic devices, or there will be some sort of improvement in the content, and that the content displayed on the ebooks which should be different from or improved in some way or another from that one displayed in printed books?
This is what we had hoped when we saw the enhanced ebook movement begin, that I was speaking about, like the Frankenstein edition I was showing you. It should have taken root. It should have caught fire because many fine artists were bringing new substance to many writings, which I thought would actually be very popular. The fact that we found out they weren't at that point, I think, now I'm going out on a limb here, but I think may have been because we weren't ready for it. At that early stage in the ebooks development, people were too concerned about, was an ebook going to be as good as print? That was what the question you heard all the time. Would all the pages be there? Could you read to the end? Could you focus, or would you lose your attention span? I'm hoping now that people are more comfortable with digital. In the next 10 years, we'll see a revival of some of these efforts, as you're saying, to bring the enrichment of other artistry and of other people's ways of working into ebook capacity, because the capacity is there. You can merge these effects very beautifully and bring in the work of more intelligence if you're willing to give it a chance on the market. It is, as I was saying, expensive, and many publishers felt like it wasn't worth the risk because they were not getting a return on their investment at the time. Let's hope it was a temporary, early stage wrong foot, and that perhaps we can give it another try and really push it off next.
Yes, this is very great. You can see that the ebooks have provided different advantages and different opportunities for people to read. But do you think that we are in a position to convince people to through ebooks to be more avid readers? Because you can see our children nowadays are more fascinated with the technology, mass media, social media, watching movies, but they are not interested to read more and more. How can we use this technology and ebooks as a medium for convincing and persuading them to be a good readers, at
This is
least
what
for their study or school courses, school books, and so on?
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. I actually think that those of our those populations in the world that were digitally connected for education during the pandemic, we have many students working from home right now in the United States. I think that they are going to be better e-readers in the future because they are becoming comfortable at that early age of working with this material online. To them, this will not be very strange. I think we are now passing into the generation that is used to, I was talking about how books now, ebooks, live side by side with film and television on your phone. And that's never been the case before. It's never been different for these kids. The young kids who have always had books standing right beside their other games and things on their phones are very comfortable with the side by sideness, with the proximity, we would say, the closeness of these media right together. So I think it bodes well for reading. I think kids are actually having a look at a chapter of a book, and then they play a game, and then they listen to music, and then they watch their TV show, all on the device. To them, this will not be strange. It was strange to us because we were a little bit older than they were, not much, Fauzi. But
Yeah, yeah,
I
yes,
think
yes.
I think that as they come up, they will be much more ready for e-reading. And it's another reason that publishers have pushed so hard to get on into the electronic age, because those audiences are going to be waiting.
Yes, right now we can find that the artificial intelligence, Mr. Anderson, is now prevailing every aspect in our life. Do you think that this discipline will also affect the publication and also distribution of ebooks in the future?
Oh yes, terribly. It's an interesting issue because we're using AI primarily in e-commerce. What AI does for publishing is help us detect a user's interests, help us understand where that user wants to go for the next book, help us create recommendations, help us know how to flag them in email, whether they would prefer a text message, how they want to be advertised to. Business wise, AI has been very, very successful. This is why, of course, Amazon does what it does. That is AI at work, that algorithm that knows just what to offer you when you finish the book you just finished. Very clever stuff and very advanced. In some instances, in terms of content, it's a little more difficult, but in educational and scholarly work, it's been a great boon. If researchers need to find a certain body of material, and you're looking at reams and reams of journals from 30 years, for example, AI can discover, can go through and ferret out exactly what you need. One of the interesting things that Wattpad does, as a matter of fact, they call it their story DNA. It's really an AI system, so that a film producer comes to Wattpad and says, I want to make a film about speedboats and some kids who enjoy speedboats. Can you give me anything about boats? The AI at Wattpad will go to work and search out all of the material that has boating, water stories, themes that connect to that, and give that then to the studio and say, is any of this useful for you to make a film from? This is one of the ways they're actually able to transmit the right material to the film and television industry. So AI is working with content more and more, but its initial entry into our industry has been through e-commerce.
Yes, I can see behind you in the back, behind you the very very fascinating library and with the very great number of books. Do you think that maybe after some years you will tell your grandsons that once a day I have a printed book?
I don't know. It's so interesting. I can't let go of them, you know. I don't think anybody can. We all we all are hanging on to our books. I think I will have them all my life. But I think they'll always be with us. I think our print books, you know what I find now, when I read an ebook and I like it a great deal, I'll buy the hard copy because I want it on my shelf. So it turns out to be a seal of approval now for me to have a hard copy of a book. It's an interesting way to think of print.
Oh, yes, yes. So do you think, my last point is that, do you think there will be any more consumers or clientele for the e-printed books in the future, or all the future will be for the ebooks or audiobooks?
We will always have clients for the print. There are people who simply want, you know, you made one of the best points right at the very beginning today. There are people who want to hang on to print because they can focus better. They need to get away from the grid, as we say, the internet connections of their phones and their devices. And that's one of the things they value the most about print. There are others who hold them as artistic objects. You know, they think of them as an aesthetic, which is quite wonderful because especially a handmade book is a thing of great value and beauty. And there are others who simply like to have the experience of paper. They'll tell you that it smells good. They'll tell you that they love the feel of it. I think those people will not go away. I think we'll always have people who prefer print, and the industry will be eager to produce it for them. Most of our publishing professionals today came up in a world of print, and they too are very, very attached to it. I think print will always be with us. I just think that we're going to introduce new and new possibilities through our electronic and digital capabilities as we go.
Yes, this is very great. You can see, Mr. Anderson, that most people nowadays are moving to be more visual than auditory persons, and they rely most of the time on the social media platforms and application to get their news. And rather than reading a book or reading from different resources, do you think that we are heading up to different sources of knowledge and information more than the book?
This is worrying me a little bit. I'll tell you why. It's the one thing I have concern about with audiobooks. The more people listen to audiobooks, the less they're actually reading. And I think that if we use our ears instead of our eyes, eventually we forget how to read. We learn the habit at one point, but we can lose the habit if we're not careful. So I'm a little concerned about the success of audio. I'm certainly concerned about film and television for that reason, especially as I was saying, in a golden age of TV, so many of these films are so good, you don't come out wanting to read the book. You're satisfied. It's a completely fine production, and that's all you need. This is not necessarily good for our remembering how to read. Sitting still and getting immersed, as we call it, the immersive experience of reading, is a bit of an art. It's certainly a bit of a skill that we don't want to lose. And so I am somewhat concerned that some of that will be lost. I don't think it would be good for us because I think that when we read, we imagine in ways we never do otherwise. So I'm a little bit on the fence about that and worried, but we can't stop it. It's like you were saying, it's the imperative. It is something that publishers must do. And so we're all nervous in that regard a little bit, hoping that we won't forget how to read.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Anderson, for this nice discussion. And if you can allow me to conclude some of the key points we have already discussed in this lecture for today, we can find that while the book publishing business has so far been focused on digital devices and e-commerce, we can find that the next phase of development may be more challenging. Another point is that the digital context has taken books out of what once was a special place among entertainment media, and books now stand side by side on those digital devices with sister media. Some of those media are more attractive and popular than reading in many in our visually oriented societies, and the competition is fierce. Also, you can find that the publishing that success will lie in the publisher's development of the kind of storytelling product that publishing and its partner will want to make available in as many entertainment media as possible. And the keys to success will depend on deploying digital distribution as broadly as possible while maintaining the integrity and the quality of each story core in this highly fluid digital development environment. Also here, we invite you, Mr. Anderson, for our upcoming event about the impact of space, redesigning the humanity's future and new frontiers of geopolitics, innovation, and discovery, which will be held also by Trends here. And we will update you about this, the agenda of the event before it.
Thank you. I would love to see this.
Yes. Would you like to add any more comments before we finish this lecture? If you can?
No, I think you've summed us up very well. Thank you, Fauzi. You've been a very gracious host, and it's great to be here with Trends and with the audience today. Thank you all for your attention. It's been most exciting to do this, and I'm glad we're having this dialogue. It's an important one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.